And so I'm pleased to be here this morning. I'm pleased to see a lot of young people. And whenever I give talks like this, whether you're a member of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, or the Green Party or some other party, I encourage you to go work on a political campaign. And then I encourage you to get involved in politics. And I encourage you to involve yourself in public service, that despite the low opinion Americans have, and rightfully so, of many people in public service, that it is an honorable calling. We are a disputatious people in a nation founded on dissent. And the practice of that dissent and the active participation in the contact sport of our democracy is a noble thing, and I've been honored to be part of it. I had the great honor to work for a terrific man, a great American, John McCain. I had the terrific honor to be at a very senior level in the re-election effort of President George Bush, a man I greatly admire. I had the honor to serve on Vice President Cheney's staff, to be involved in the confirmations with two of the finest men I've ever known, Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Samuel Alito, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, people that encompass in my party a broad range on its ideological diversity, but good and honorable men that I was proud to be associated with, and thankful for the opportunities that they afforded me. And for those of you who go into the campaign business, I've been in the winning presidential campaign, a losing presidential campaign. A winning presidential campaign is more fun, and I definitely recommend that to all of you. I've been asked today to talk about the future of the Republican Party, the media revolution that we're in the middle of, and to talk a little bit about the effect that talk radio has on the Republican landscape. And so I want to begin today by asking, for those willing to volunteer by a show of hands, how many of you are Republicans in the audience? How many of you are Democrats in the audience? How many of you are Democrats in the audience who have voted for a Republican in the past or could potentially be open to doing so again? How many of you are independents, that back and forth in any election? So I have a little audio clip that I want to play for you to listen to, and then I'm gonna come back to it. Can we play the clip?
All right, now I'm ready. Now I'm ready for battle. Dave in Bloomfield, New Jersey, a lib, WABC. Go.
Thanks very much. Listening to your show opening this evening, you sound very hyperbolic and over the top, bordering on fear-mongering. Barack Obama said he's going to lower taxes for 90% of the working...
Give me my Pat music, would you?
What's that?
Let me tell you something, David. We regular Americans who understand the greatness of this country... I hope you're listening, David. We regular Americans who understand the greatness of this country, who believe in private property, who don't give a damn what Barack Obama's going to give us, we're going to roll you libs. Are you listening? Are you there? I'm talking to you. Now shut up and listen, moron. That's right. We're going to roll you libs. We know what's better for you than what you know. You don't even know what's good for you, you moron. You'll surrender your liberty tomorrow for a few shekels, won't you? Bring them up.
Are you going to?
Are you listening to me? Now shut up. That's right. I'm educating you. I'm going to wring out all that clutter in your brain that's been indoctrinated in there since the day you were in 4th grade. Because you don't understand that liberty lost is liberty we cannot regain, do you?
So my point is, to the Democrats who are open to voting for a Republican, and to the independents that vote back and forth between the parties, does that resonate with anyone in a way that makes you want to vote for a Republican candidate? Anybody? Anyone inspired by that? Well, that's Mark Levin. That's the #4 rated talk radio host in the country, and that's someone who identifies himself as a keeper of the flame of Reaganism. And that he would position himself as an heir to Ronald Reagan's legacy is a grotesquerie. It's a grotesquerie. And that type of rhetoric is off-putting to the people that we need to have to win elections, who will come in and vote for Republican candidates. As you can see by the show of hands, in a state that Republicans have to win in order to win presidential contests, right, that independents and Democratic voters very off-put by that. And we'll come back to talk radio in a little bit. We live in a two-party system, and Republicans who are now out of power, both at the executive level and the legislative level, will return to power. The question is, how long will that take? I believe, if you look at the record of the Obama administration, it's going to be faster than was previously thought because of their overreaching into a number of different areas. And I don't know if we will be back in control of the U.S. Senate or the House of Representatives in 2010, but almost for sure there will be dramatic gains for Republicans. And in fact, you'll look back over these last 2 years and you'll see the high water mark for the Democratic Party was in fact the day of the inauguration, and it's been on a slope of decline since then. And the spending and the overreaching and the dithering on national security issues, all of these things will combine to create a good climate for Republican candidates. Now, in fact, if you look at President Obama's approval rating and you look at the divisions along partisan lines in the country, he is the most polarizing president ever in the modern era. There's no one that is close at this point, according to the numbers, at his point in the administration. The great political story of the first 9-10 months of the administration is the collapse of the independent voter who supported him, and then moving back into a position where they are prepared and ready to vote for Republican candidates in this midterm election. And if you're one of the, I think, 46 Democrats representing a seat in Congress where George Bush or John McCain won, you have to be looking right now from a position of nervousness about the coming electoral landscape. And this health care bill is a great example, because no matter how it is spun on television by favorable press commentators, no matter how gifted the president's oratory is, and I have an appreciation for how gifted it is, it doesn't make sense to the American people that you're going to insure 30 million more people, you're going to make care better for everybody, and it's not going to cost any money. It doesn't make sense, and the American people understand this. And so what the Congress is producing is a $1 trillion indecipherable Washington takeover of a huge percentage of the American economy that's going to make health care more expensive, to make people's coverage worse. And at the end of the day, the American people are going to reject it. When you look at the rate of spending by the Congress and the exorbitant debt that the country is incurring, the biggest story in the world, as the Wall Street Journal puts out right now, is the decline of the dollar. And countries with vast dollar reserves are doing everything they can to get rid of the dollar as the reserve currency, because half of the budget every year, almost half of it, is debt that is financed by China. And as John McCain says, this is generational theft. We're mortgaging the future of the country. We're spending it into oblivion. Trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. And then the accompanying tax increases that are going to come from the servicing of that debt. And as the columnist and essayist Charles Krauthammer, I think, brilliantly wrote and observed in a speech where he framed that the issue is fundamentally one of the trajectories of nation are not fixed, where there's an inevitable decline or an inevitable rise. There is a choice involved. And in a free country where the people are sovereign, the people will make the choice whether America in the 21st century is a rising nation or is a nation that declines. And I think that that is a framework under which a debate can take place. And I would recommend that everybody in the room read his brilliant essay on this, but for Republicans to pay very careful attention to it, because he lays out a theme and an architecture under which the rebirth of the party can begin in earnest. Because the fundamental question for Republicans to address is, how do we continue the upward trajectory of American life from generation to generation? How do we ensure and guarantee that our children's future is stronger than our past, that every generation is better off than the last, which is part of the great legacy that has been handed down to all of us by previous generations of Americans. So the Republican Party and the conservative movement is going to need to come up with policies that address the issues like unemployment, that address the issues of the loss of the manufacturing base in this country, where you have parts of the country, parts of the Central Valley in California, the agricultural breadbasket of America, where there is 40+% unemployment, where there is the highest unemployment rates in some parts of this country in 70 years. So the Republican Party is going to have to come up with a jobs program, a spending program, and deal with issues in a way that is relevant to today's problems. Ronald Reagan's conservatism in the early 1980s was relevant to the problems of that day and age. Well, in 2010, the Republican Party will thrive when it can make conservatism relevant to today's problems. And that a conservatism which rests on the notion that the free market system is worth preserving and expanding. It has created wealth and opportunity at a level that is above and beyond any of its possible alternatives. That this question of American exceptionalism, that we are not just a nation that stands in the middle of the roster of nations, but we're the greatest force for good as a nation in the history of the world. We have fed more people, clothed more people, liberated more people than all the other peoples of the world combined since the beginning of time. That's what American exceptionalism is. That we are the indispensable nation in the world, and that we are proud but not boastful in asserting our special role in the world. So all of those things together, I think, present the fabric and patchwork of a Republican revival. What are the serious Republican proposals to deal with health care in a sensible way? Because the inflation of health care costs is a huge problem. It's a huge problem in the country. If you're a CEO, if you're a labor leader, if you run a nonprofit, if you run a small business, you wrestle with the cost of health care. What are the Republican solutions to that? There are some good steps out there. There are some good proposals by Paul Ryan from Wisconsin, but the party as a whole has not rallied around an approach to a hugely important issue. When you look at the monstrosity that is the job-killing tax code that the American people have to deal with, it's incomprehensible to everybody. What are the Republican proposals to create jobs and economic growth by reformation of the tax code, by helping people keep more of what they earn, by simplifying it and by flattening it? The American people, and particularly younger people, are environmentally conscious. So the Republican Party cannot be seen as hostile to the environment and has to explain to the American people that there can be a balance between jobs and economic growth and environmental protection, and have to go out and articulate on those issues. If you look at the United Kingdom, David Cameron is likely to be the next prime minister. And you see now the rise of a new conservative party, new conservative movement in the United Kingdom that represents the cyclical nature of politics, the cycle completing itself. Thatcherism, that coalition ultimately collapsed, and Tony Blair rose. And then the labor coalition that Tony Blair under Gordon Brown has collapsed, and the Conservative Party will soon be back in charge. That will happen again in this country. And I think that there are a number of good presidential candidates in 2012 and 2016. But the party has to be able to speak seriously to the issues of the day, and it can't be a voice of resentment and anger like we heard a little while ago on the radio from Mr. Levin. And here's the point. Millions of people listen to talk radio every day. There's a great case study for this, and it's the 2008 presidential election. The conservative media complex, as it exists, did everything it possibly could, except throw a kitchen sink at John McCain's head to try to stop him from winning the nomination. And it was unsuccessful, because the people who listen to the radio are not programmable when it comes to their vote. Talk radio hosts can certainly influence the debate in the country. They can bring attention to issues in the country. They can focus attention on all manner of things. But they certainly don't instruct people how to vote. And to the extent that people in the middle who decide elections hear the angry rantings of a Mark Levin, they are not inclined to give Republican leaders the benefit of the doubt, one, or two, be open to the ideas that are expressed by the Republican Party, because most people in this country are decent people. They're polite people, and they don't like the bullying, and they don't like the screaming and the lack of civility that was represented in that exchange. And at the end of the day, Republican politicians who seek to lead the party and in fact seek to lead the government cannot be seen as kowtowing to the emperors of talk radio. If they are, then I think the broad middle of the electorate that decides elections disqualifies them from leadership, because a leader has to speak broadly, to all the people. And the tone, that angry tone, is blurring the conservative message that millions and millions of Americans have voted for in the past and are open to voting for again. But the definition of who is a good conservative and who is not cannot be a function of who is the angriest. Because a lot of this debate that's taking place in Washington today, or taking place in the Republican Party about let's kick this person out of the party or that person out of the party, isn't along the lines of any disagreement on issues. It's a disagreement about tone. If you don't subscribe to my angry tone, then you're not a conservative, you're not a Republican, kick you out of the party. Politics is a game of addition, not subtraction. I've said many times, if this was rocket science, I wouldn't be in this business. It's a very simple concept to understand how you win an election in America. You got to get more votes than the other person. Therefore, you don't want to kick people out of your political party. You want to invite people into your political party. And as Ronald Reagan famously said, is, to paraphrase him, a person who agrees with me on 80% of the issues is not my 20% enemy. They're part of a broad coalition that can attract majority support in the country. And that's vital to rebuilding, they're vital to rebuilding the party. Vital to rebuilding the party. So there are many talented people in the talk radio universe. Rush Limbaugh, I don't know if you saw, but he did an interview on the Today Show in the last 2 days. It was very compelling. He talked openly about his struggles. I think people find inspiration when you see a person who has fallen and risen again. When he talked about his addiction, I thought it was inspiring, and I thought it probably helped some people out there. very talented guy. $400 million contract because he has the ability to entertain 20 million people a day for 3 hours a day without notes speaking. Extraordinary talent. He can focus attention on issues, and he can help frame a debate. But when the American people see people who would seek to lead the country afraid of a guy who's sitting in a radio studio, they look and ask an obvious and a fair question. If he's afraid of the guys on talk radio, how's he going to do against Vladimir Putin? And that's one of the issues that the leadership of the party is going to have to deal with. And I have no doubt that there will be people who emerge who are not timid and who are not fearful, and will in fact do for the Republican Party what President Clinton did to the Democratic Party. Make it palatable again to a broad national audience, which is one of the things that Bill Clinton accomplished in his election in 1992 when he confronted some of the most extreme elements in his party. And so that will be an important mission for the next Republican, candidate in the next leadership of the party. Because we are in the middle of a profound media transformation. As you rightly pointed out, the New York Times lead story today is a story that by this time this morning is old news everywhere, because people can get their news onto their cell phones or their BlackBerries or on their computers. And let me posit that I believe that we're in the middle of a revolution in communication. It's every bit as profound as the transition from the telegraph to the radio, from the radio to the television, and now from the television to social media. I'm sure everyone remembers the TV show MASH. Well, when MASH went off the air in its final episode, nearly 100 million people watched that farewell episode. But that was in a 3-network world where there were 5 national newspapers in the wire services. In a 300-channel TV universe where people program the music they like on their iPod, where they turn on the political shows on cable that reinforce their viewpoint, where there's not just one cooking channel. You can find a channel for Mediterranean cooking or Southern cooking. You don't have to see anything that you don't want to see in today's media world. More and more you will see people self-programming their television through things like Apple TV, using their digital video recorders to fast forward through commercials. So people are able to process and absorb the information that they want to see and absorb, and to block out in this fractious media world the information that they don't want to see. A columnist recently pointed out that the late-night comedian, or former late-night comedian David Brenner, still a comedian, he had a show on in 1988. It was a late-night show that was a colossal failure at the time. It had 3.7 million people in the audience. Well, if he was on TV today on that late-night show, he'd be one of the kings of cable TV. Those ratings would be extraordinary, because it's extraordinary to have 4 million people tune in to watch your show in a world where there's 300 channels to choose from. And therefore, there becomes, with that, there is an exaggerated importance attached, all right? An exaggerated importance attached to shows with 3 million or 4 million people in the context of a nation of 300 million people. So if you're programming politics, which there's a core audience for in the millions of people, and there's a conservative network and there's a liberal network, and the liberals all watch one network and the conservatives all watch another network, and you're in the business of politics and you want to talk to voters who are most paying attention and agree with you, it becomes a naturally reinforcing cycle. There's a surreal aspect on a presidential campaign. When you're running one or involved in the senior leadership of it, it's like managing a circus. And the presidential convoy is out there where you are with the candidate on his bus, and behind the candidate's bus is another bus, filled with campaign staffers and all the people who do the logistics. And behind that bus might be another bus. And behind that bus is the bus with all the media on it. So a presidential campaign, to some extent, is groups of people on those 4 buses talking to each other on their cell phones and blackberrying each other all day long, and then being broadcast out to the world in increasingly niche markets. So today, news is as likely to break on anyone's blog, and you see that, for example, with Acorn. And you look at the incredible impact that Andrew Breitbart has had in the news environment over the last month. 2 young people walked in with their own video equipment, and they did essentially a sting operation or an investigative journalism piece of Acorn, and they took them down. They were 2 young people in their 20s with a hidden camera. But everybody can publish today. Everybody can be a broadcaster. Anybody with a laptop computer has their own broadcast platform. And that's the environment that politicians are going to be operating in. The revolutionary aspect of social media is this. It used to matter what you said about yourself and whether it was believable to people sitting at home. Because the way that you processed advertisements, right, was through the prism of what you were interested in, but it was an isolated experience. Think about how you watch TV. Watch TV either by yourself or with your spouse, maybe with your kids, or maybe with a bunch of guys at the sports bar watching the game. You're probably not paying too much attention to the commercials when the game's not on. But imagine putting yourself in your living room and you see an ad for a new Dodge truck. Well, if you're looking to buy a new pickup truck, you may pay attention to that ad. Otherwise, you ignore it. If you're looking to buy a new computer and you see a computer ad, you may process that. Otherwise, you ignore it. But you sit there and you process the ads, and does it make sense? Does it resonate? Is it believable? Is it credible to me? But you process that all by yourself. It's an individual experience. In the social media world, what matters if you're a politician is not what you say about yourself to people. It matters what other people are saying about you to each other and to their friends. They're the arbiters and they're the judge. In a world where there's thousands and thousands of new blogs being created every day, where the amount of people who are activating cell phones, rises by the thousands and thousands every day, as cell phones continue their transition from phones to mini computers. Everybody has the ability to be interconnected, talking about the subjects that they care about in a way that there's no ability to control. It used to be that you would talk to the networks and they would broadcast out, and there'd be 5 newspapers, and that was how you received the news. Well, today it's a constant moving stream. And that moving stream includes the blogosphere, it includes talk radio, it includes network news, it includes cable, but it includes every person who decides to put a blog up on the internet and self-publish their opinion. And it is a giant stew of constantly moving opinion that's shaping the environment that politicians have to operate in. So the politicians that are able to adapt most quickly, like President Obama did to this new world and to utilize it, are the ones that are going to have the highest level of success in this transitional area, because the recall rates of advertising are declining. Traditional media, such as television advertising, is going to be less and less relevant, and the number of people who are plugged into politics, right, will continue to narrow as people find the shows that reinforce their own opinions. Not a lot of people are out there, looking for the opinions of the other side, demographically, as you look. So that's the environment that the Republican Party is going to have to operate in as it seeks to renew itself and to rejuvenate itself. And in closing, before I go to questions, what I would say is that the conservative movement in America is the is the movement supported by the broadest percentage of the American people. Competence in national security, competence in running the government, discipline with the spending of the taxpayer dollars, a belief that the free enterprise system is worth defending and expanding. All of these things are the broad pillars of a 21st century conservatism that can be a majority movement in this country again. And I think as you look at this election as it's shaping up today, where the generic ballots have evened up between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party in Congress, we stand to have a very good electoral year. And then the presidential contest will begin. And the Republican candidates that can transcend the narrow, angry voices of some on the right, not all, that can reach to the middle and define conservatism with a friendly face, the way that Ronald Reagan did, in a thoughtful, uplifting way that speaks to hope, that speaks to the greatness of the country, and the promise that tomorrow is going to be better than today, are going to be successful. And there are plenty of candidates that are in the Republican stable who will be running that I think have the ability to do that. So we will be back in charge of the country and running the government again for Republicans who are disheartened. The question is how long it will take. I think we're going to make important steps in this midterm election, and then we will see in 2012. But one thing is for sure, President Obama is not going to be running on change and hope in the next election. He's going to be running on his record. And so far, when you evaluate that record, that's very good news for Republicans. Thank you very much, and I'll take any questions you have.
Patrick Kennedy, direct the speaker series here. We have time for a few questions. We're passing around 2 mics. If you'd raise your hand, I'll point to you, and we'll pass it there. We'll start with you, sir.
Hey, Mr. Schmidt, I have a quick question about cult of personality in politics, which has arguably now not only engulfed candidates, but the public high-profile consultants like yourself. I'm wondering, in a campaign setting, how you deal with media inquiries into your own life, if it's important that it plays back into a greater narrative about your candidate, how you deal with that.
You know, I haven't really experienced. I've experienced it to some degree. You know, when I was at the Republican convention, you would be stopped and people would ask to have their picture taken. If you're me, it's a surreal experience. And I finally said to one guy, what the hell are you going to do with the picture? I didn't get it. Why you'd want to picture at me? It's a surreal experience when you go through a hotel lobby in a presidential campaign, and there's 20 photographers taking your picture. It's not something that I ever sought. I love campaigns. I like politics. I'm not crazy about that part of it. I don't do a huge amount of public appearances, and the reality is that I think that the politicians and the candidates should be the message, not the consultants. And it's I can just say it's a surreal experience, going through it a little bit. And it was a strange one.
Question. Todd.
I'm one of the students here. My name's Todd Moore. Thanks for coming. We really appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
I really appreciate what you had to say this morning, and it seems as though I appreciate what you're saying more than McCain appreciated what you have to say, because a lot of the things that you're talking about he didn't do. Particularly when you talk about, I've read recently about you coming out against Sarah Palin for 2012 run, and her choice as a VP candidate seems to be counterintuitive to that. My question to you is, who would you have chosen for, in hindsight, as a VP for McCain, and did you choose or counsel him to choose Sarah Palin as a VP then?
I did. And I believe to this day that had she not been picked as the vice presidential candidate, we would never have been ahead, not for 1 second, not for 1 minute, not for 1 hour, not for 1 day, is that her candidacy excited the Republican Party. It appealed at first broadly to the middle of the electorate, and there was huge excitement. It transformed the race. And there is a fundamental reality to the race. We were 3 points ahead on September 15th when the stock market crashed, and then the election was over. If you look at the election, and what I always said to John McCain, and before you can have a strategy, you have to have a strategic premise. And my strategic premise in the race is that we're running a campaign in the worst environment in the modern history of the country for a Republican candidate. That President Bush, who I had the honor to serve in his administration, who I have deep affection for, had become deeply unpopular. There was an unpopular war. The economy was not going well. We were running against a historic and gifted candidate in an environment where the media coverage was so not on the level, that I think it was at parity proportions. Now, we tried to make that case that it wasn't on the level in the campaign, not very successfully. People have seen it for themselves over these last couple of months, and I think this Nobel Peace Prize. I congratulate the president. I'm happy for the honor. It is what it is, and it doesn't help him at all, because a Saturday Night Live properly captured the mood of the country. Now, there's nothing that I can tell that that he's done that would lead to the awarding of the Nobel Peace Prize. And we got outspent by $250 million in the fall campaign. And all of those things combined, we're not going to help. But what I said to Senator McCain was that I believe we're on a trajectory to lose the election. If you recall the election, President Obama came back in July from this fantastic trip in Europe, and he surged to a 12-point lead. And what I said at the time, at the beginning of August, I said, we're 12 points down. His lead is continuing to spread. His convention goes first. All this talk about the division between the Obamas and the Clintons is all nonsense in reality. Hillary Clinton's going to give the speech of her life. President Clinton is President Clinton, and that's going to be a showstopper. The first night of our convention, we're going to have President Bush and Vice President Cheney. And by the time we get to the second night, we could be in a situation where we're down 22, 23 points among all of those things, and the race is over. And we came up with an advertising flight in August that were the celebrity ads, as you may recall, that I thought spoke to something true about President Obama, Senator Obama at the time, and they worked. But they were a tactical tool to try to even the race. And so what was our moment to go ahead? There were a handful of days, in the race, in a presidential race that are unequal to other days. They're the vice presidential pick, there's the nominating speeches, and there's the debate performance. And it is true that the Katie Couric interview was not a good event for the campaign, but it was not a determinative event. And in my view, she did just fine in the debate against Vice President Biden. And I think any fair reading of that debate is that she won the debate. So when I look back and consider that, I did advise him that he ought to do that. I think that it was politically the right thing to do in the context of that decision. We never would have been ahead if not. And she's a person who has great talents, that are indisputable. When you look back at the speech that she gave to the Republican convention, there's not another politician in America could have worked out on the national stage that first time and done that speech. It was one of the great speeches ever given, at a national convention. It was amazing. And so when you're in a campaign that's behind and you have the job that, that I had, your job is to figure out how to win, no matter how improbable all the things that are stacked up against you. And once the economy collapsed, we were in a race where everything we didn't work. As people saw their life savings evaporated, they blamed someone, and they blamed the party that they perceived to be in charge at the time. And it was very difficult for us, from that point forward, to be strategically coherent as a campaign, and it upended, our entire strategic plan for the fall once that happened.
Question. Start with you, right there, in the red.
Well, I'm wondering what you think of the present administration's attempts to go after Fox News.
Well, look, I think it's a mistake by the administration to do it. All administrations get frustrated by the media. All administrations have transactional engagements with the media, and on the campaign, I went in a very public way. I was very open and public in my criticism of the New York Times. But I did it from my platform as a campaign official, not a government official. And I think it is worrisome and chilling when the executive branch seeks to engage in a protracted fight with a television network in a country where free speech and freedom of the press is one of the bedrock foundations of our democracy. And I think as a tactic, it is diminishing to the president. I think as a strategy, it brings attention to issues that are out there, that he's thin-skinned, can't take criticism, and it puts a highlight on some of the criticisms that you hear on Fox News' air. The reality is no one has ever received better media coverage in the history of the world, right, than President Obama, period. Indisputable. So I think that to go after a television network that is critical, of him at times, or more critical than others, I think it's a mistake. And I think that they'll figure out it's a mistake before too long and stop doing it.
Here, Andy.
Good morning.
Good morning, ma'am.
I am a participatory democracy advocate for over 50 years, so I truly believe people should participate in a democracy. I believe there are three influences I'd like for you to speak to that will have an impact on the 21st century's politics. One is the role of youth from the cradle, those who are watching television in their little seats, and the senior citizens who are in their rocking chairs in the nursing home that can vote. The literacy or the illiteracy status of Americans as it relates to world affairs. And thirdly, the Judeo-Christian environment in which we have all been cultured. What influence will they have in this technological revolution that we are going in, particularly as it relates to the number of whether they're legal or illegal immigrants located, living in this country called the United States of America?
Look, I think that one of the face of the country is changing, and there is a substantial demographic challenge for the Republican Party. In 2000, the Hispanic population of the country was 35 million. And the total percentage of the population was 12.5%. In 2050, the Hispanic population of the country will be 102 million, and it will be 24%. And illegal immigration is a substantial problem, and I will tell you, as someone who lives in the state of California, it is an enormous problem. However, there is a right way and a wrong way to talk about the issue and to talk about this issue to Latinos and Hispanics from the Republican Party. And the message that too often goes out from the Republican Party as it's received by Latinos is, when we cut right through all the BS, comes down to, we don't like you, and the country would be better off without you. And our almost, it seems to me at times, deliberate strategy to antagonize the fastest growing demographic in the country is suicide over the long term as a political party, especially when you look at a community that as a percentage of population is the most likely to serve in the U.S. military. And, there is a compassionate way to deal with this issue, and as John McCain, I think, courageously said, I have no interest in calling the mother of a kid, I have no interest calling a kid in Iraq to tell him I'm deporting his grandmother. So there is a way to talk to this community on those issues, the way that President George Bush did, the way that Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger did, and the way that Ronald Reagan did, who got over 40% of the Latino and the Hispanic vote. When you look at issues like same-sex marriage, gay marriage, 65 plus years, the support for gay marriage is 32% yes, 66% no. When you look at 18 to 29-year-olds, it's 59% yes to 37% no. So gay marriage will ultimately be a reality in this country. It is a question of when, because the people who are 65 plus are not going to be around as long as the people who are 18 to 29. And so there are going to be changes that occur in the culture of the country that will have bearings on politics. It goes back to the original point that I tried to make by the playing of the videotape. If what people believe conservatism to be is an angry, hostile philosophy, as opposed to a philosophy rooted in tradition that has fueled great progress in this country and is open to all people, all colors, all creeds, then the party is going to have a problem. Now, when you look at voting, most reliable voters are senior citizens. Senior citizens are very angry about this health care deal. And they're all going to be voting in the midterm election. And there's going to be a lot less young people voting in the midterm election than voted in the last election. So the turnout mix is going to be a lot more favorable to Republicans. And finally, when you talk about our schools, I think there are two issues. The one is that you really don't teach civics in the classroom anymore. People don't understand about the traditions of the country, the good that is America. It's not taught in the way, from a foundation of here's history, here's what happened, the way it was taught when I was a kid. But I think that there is one last chapter in the civil rights struggle. And that chapter is this. The last civil rights issue in the country now that we have an African-American president is the state of our schools. And it's a travesty when you look in the inner cities of this country and you see schools where there are black and Hispanic dropout rates that exceed 70% in places. It's destroying a generation of it's destroying a generation of our young people, one, but two, it is destroying our country's future because we need to produce the engineers and we need to produce the world-class scientists that can compete with China and India in the 21st century. And if you look at the Nobel Prizes, it was very American heavy, on the science and all of that. But as we move forward in the century, if we don't give quality education to all our kids, that's not going to happen. And that should be an issue that Republicans are keenly focused on.
Steve, I've got one question before we wind up, is that in...
It's always the last question that gets you in big trouble.
And you know it's coming. Arkansas, home of Bill Clinton, also a home of Mike Huckabee. Looks like it's going to be a very contested U.S. Senate, U.S. congressional race. Would you talk about, one, Huckabee, and two, any insight on the campaigns of Senator Blanche Lincoln and the Southern strategy for the Republicans in 2010 and 12?
Well, I got to know Governor Huckabee a little bit on the campaign trail, and you know, I'm sure a lot of you in this room, you know him personally in the state and have great affection for him. And he's just one of the finest people I've ever met in my political career. He and his wife, wonderful, wonderful man, down to earth, funny, super talented as a politician. Campaigns with a happy face, not an angry face, and I think he's a hugely important voice in the Republican Party, and you know, I think he'll be a formidable candidate should he decide to run. The Republican Party has an almost unerring tradition of nominating people who have run once and lost and come back for the second track, and you know, for the second try. And I think that he's a very, very, very formidable candidate. I think that Senator Lincoln could have a very tough race here. The environment matters in politics, and the Democrats had two of the best environments that they've had in a generation in 2002, 2006, and 2008, and that's gone. And the Republicans are now going to be running in what appears, if you were to project forward from today, the best environment that Republicans have run in since 1994. So when you look at states like Arkansas, this is a state where you could see Republican gains, and I think that Tim Griffin's run for Congress, and Tim is a friend of mine, but I tell you, if I was a Democratic incumbent member of Congress running against Tim Griffin, I would be extremely worried, because he is smart, he is tenacious, he has served his country in war, and he understands politics, and he's a person who loves this state, who's a great speaker, a great campaigner, has got a lot of enthusiasm. I think he's going to raise all the resources that he needs to run and win, and so like when you look at Arkansas, I think there's great opportunity here for Republicans in 2010.